We devoted our last lesson to understanding what a civil war is. What did we learn there? A civil war is a kind of war that happens amongst people who live in the same country. This is very different from our traditional concept of war, which means that any foreign power or any external power is attacking. But a civil war takes place when people who are living in the same country fight against each other. Now, in the case of American Civil War, we saw that the country or the newly formed nation, that was the United States of America, divided into two halves. On one side were the Union forces and on the other side were the Confederate forces. Now, these Confederate states comprised the various southern states of the newly independent nation, and on the other hand, the northern states had together joined hands with the federal forces to make the Union forces. Now, this is a characteristic of a civil war. In a civil war, there is always one group that sides with the government and the other group protests or rebels against this group that is with the government. Now, this is a rough idea that we have had of the American Civil War. Now, to understand why the American Civil War broke out in the first place, we have to trace the various reasons that contributed to the outbreak of this war. Few of the very important reasons that led to the outbreak of the American Civil War are what we will be discussing in this lesson. Now, when we begin to discuss the various causes of the American Civil War, we have to keep three very important points in mind. The first very important point that we should remember is the North-South divide. Now, we have learnt that the American Civil War broke out between the southern states on the one hand and the northern states on the other hand. Now, it is imperative on our part to understand what led to the split or this difference between the northern states and the southern states. This discussion we will come to later, but for now remember that this North-South divide was an integral reason behind the outbreak of the American Civil War. Coming to the next reason, we have to take into account the territorial expansion of USA after this nation got its independence. Now, after USA got its independence, it rampantly started increasing its territories towards the west. Now, both the southern and the northern states saw this as an opportunity to gain territories, that is to expand their own territories. And eventually, this also contributed as one of the reasons why the American Civil War broke out. And the final and the most brutal reason behind the outbreak of the Civil War was the issue of slavery. This issue of slavery constitutes a very brutal and miserable part of the history of the USA. Now, the northern and the southern states had divided themselves on this issue of slavery, that one half or one group was supporting this issue of slavery and the other group was trying its best to abolish slavery. Now, in this lesson we will find out which group supported slavery and why that group of states supported slavery, and on the other hand which group was trying to abolish this. So, these are the three important points or three very crucial points that we will be taking into account while discussing the causes of the American Civil War. Now, you must be wondering what caused this split between the northern and the southern states. Because previously the northern and the southern states together united to fight back the British colonial rule. And in this way, they gained the United States of America its independence. This way, they also gained freedom from British colonial rule. Now, a split between the northern and the southern states could not happen without a reason. There must be any specific reason behind this. In our previous lesson, we learned that the American Civil War took place between the northern states and the federal forces on the one hand and the southern states or the confederate states on the other hand. Now, what caused conflict among these two states? Now, there isn't one reason, no sole reason behind the outbreak of the American Civil War. Now, let us try to understand what was happening on the economic front in the northern and the southern states. And to understand what was happening economically in the northern and the southern states, we have to go back to a time when these were colonies. That is, when these were the northern and the southern colonies under British colonial rule. When Britain set up its 13 colonies in North America, it divided the colonies into 3 groups. Now, the first set of colonies that Britain established in North America came to be known as the New England colonies. So, these were the colonies that were in the northern part of the continent. After these were the middle colonies, that is, the colonies that lied in the middle. And after the middle colonies were the southern colonies. Now, in this way, Britain had divided its colonies in North America into 3 groups. Now, when Britain was developing these colonies in North America so that these colonies could produce goods, so that these colonies could provide raw materials to Britain, Britain chose to develop these colonies in different ways. So, the northern and the southern colonies developed differently. Now, this differential development between the northern and the southern colonies should be understood in terms of their geographical location. Now, let us find out how the geographical location of the northern and the southern colonies played a crucial role in the difference of their developments. The southern colonies, that is, the colonies that lied below Virginia, were agrarian colonies. Why were these agrarian colonies? That is, why were these southern colonies agrarian? This is because the southern colonies, that is, the lands in the southern colonies, were very fertile to produce cash crops in the likes of cotton, tobacco and sugarcane. And the pursuit of agriculture in the southern colonies made these colonies rural in nature. In fact, this image here shows you how the southern colonies were rural. These were agrarian colonies because it was only agriculture that was being pursued in these colonies. These colonies were the producers of raw materials, that is, they produced cash crops, and the most important among these cash crops was cotton. This is what was happening in the southern colonies when Britain was ruling America. Now let us find out what was happening in the northern colonies and how geography played a very crucial role in this case as well. The northern colonies that Britain had in North America, on the other hand, were quite close to the Arctic Circle, which made the northern colonies very cold. Now, these very cold colonies were also infertile, which is why agriculture could not be pursued in these northern colonies. But on the other hand, these northern colonies boasted of very strategic ports. These northern colonies had very good access to ports and waterways. These ports in the northern colonies helped in trading with Britain. It was easier for Britain to take goods from here and bring in goods to these ports, which is why these northern colonies now started developing during the British colonial rule. So, these northern colonies were now evolving into trading centers, simply because the British colonial rule was trading with these northern colonies. And simultaneously with developing as important trading centers, these northern colonies were also important on the administrative front, because offices, important government buildings and various centers were being developed in the northern colonies alone. The southern colonies, on the other hand, were deprived in this regard. The northern colonies were also important manufacturing units. This is because the southern colonies produced raw materials which were then sent to the northern colonies, and these northern colonies made or manufactured goods out of those raw materials that they procured from the southern colonies. This made the northern colonies important manufacturing units. Together with being important manufacturing units, these northern colonies were also important administrative and trading units. So this shows you how development happened very differently, very distinctly between the northern and the southern colonies. The northern colonies were gaining importance, they were gaining power, they were being able to trade with Britain, and the southern colonies were left out in this regard. It was during the British colonial rule that the northern colonies and the southern colonies developed differently. But soon after, the British left America and USA got its independence. When the Industrial Revolution reached America, it had diverse impacts. The northern colonies emerged as important industrial centers with the introduction of railways and construction of canals, but the southern colonies remained rural and agrarian. Cotton was still being planted in these colonies, so these colonies were rural and agrarian in nature. And this caused a difference in the economy between the northern colonies and the southern colonies. So what did we learn just now? When the British were ruling the northern and the southern colonies, these colonies were developing differently. Now, even after America got its independence and these colonies became states, the Industrial Revolution had diverse impacts on the northern states and the southern states. Owing to the differential impact of the Industrial Revolution, the northern states were now industrialized. So, these northern states now emerged as important industrial centers. Railway was being introduced. Simultaneously with that, canals were also being constructed. Now, the northern states were producers of finished goods. While the northern states were producers of finished goods and they were able to trade those goods with UK, the southern states still remained rural and agrarian. Now, the southern states were the places that provided raw materials, raw resources to the northern states for the production of goods. So, the southern states were still agrarian and they were the producers of raw materials. With this in mind, by now you should have understood what was the difference in the economy between the northern states and the southern states. The northern states were important industrial centers. They were performing trade. With trade comes in money, with trade comes in wealth. But on the other hand, the southern states were not as developed, which is why they were also relatively less affluent and less wealthy. They were only able to pursue agriculture in their lands. Now, what did this difference mean in the longer run? In the longer run, it meant that the northern states made their own finished goods. So, they had the capability to produce their own finished goods because they had various factories, various industries that had sprung up after the Industrial Revolution reached America. But on the other hand, the impact or the developmental impact of the Industrial Revolution did not reach the southern states, which is why they largely remained as the producers of raw materials. They were producing cotton, sugarcane, tobacco, and these resources or these raw materials were being exchanged with the northern states so that they could now produce goods out of those and trade those goods out of the country. In this way, exchange trade was being performed between the northern and the southern states. The plantation workers had to send these raw materials to the northern states where the various industries produced finished goods and traded those goods with other countries. Now, before proceeding with this lesson and understanding this exchange trade and the impact of it better, let me ask you a question. State whether this following statement is true or false. The southern states of USA made their own finished goods. Is this sentence true or false? Yes, you are right. This sentence is false. The southern states of USA were not able to produce their own finished goods. It were the northern states that were producing their own finished goods, and for this they relied upon the southern states which provided them raw materials. With this, let us try to understand the various trading relations that were in place. Now, who was USA's major trading partner? It was UK. USA traded its goods with UK and UK also exchanged its goods with USA. So, this trade relationship between UK and USA is very important when we get into discussing the difference between the northern and the southern states and the difference in the economy of these two sets of states. Now, the southern states were able to pursue agriculture. With agriculture came raw materials. The southern states were then exchanging these raw materials with the northern states. What were the northern states doing with these raw materials? They were producing finished goods out of these raw materials, and after making these finished goods, they were sending or trading these finished goods with UK. So, finished goods went from the northern states of USA to UK, and the southern states were able to send only raw materials to UK. So, Britain was receiving two sets of things from the two states. From the northern states, it was receiving finished goods, and from the southern states, it was receiving raw materials. And in turn, after this, UK or Britain was trading its finished goods with USA. Now, how did this happen? When the southern states were sending raw materials to Britain, Britain was also producing finished goods that it traded with USA. Now, this is a complex pattern, but you should understand this so that you can understand this major cause behind the outbreak of the Civil War very clearly. This complex pattern of trading relationship between the UK and the USA is very integral when we have to understand the economy of the northern states and the southern states. When Britain sent these finished goods to USA, the northern states did not require these finished goods. It is because the northern states were already producing their own finished goods from the raw materials that they were getting from the southern states. So, the southern states were lacking in funds, they were lacking in wealth, because they could only send raw materials either to the northern states or UK. And in turn, they had to purchase finished goods from either the northern states or Britain. We just discussed this point that this complex trading relation between UK and USA is very important in our understanding of this reason behind the outbreak of the Civil War. Now, these trading terms were also the fountainhead of economic clashes. Why did economic clashes take place? Economic clashes took place for something called trade tariffs. Now, what are trade tariffs? Suppose I am producing some good in my country. I am living in India and I am producing some finished goods. Now when I am sending those finished goods to UK maybe, trade tariffs will be imposed on the goods I am sending to the UK. Why is it so? This is because whenever a country is importing any goods from any foreign country, trade tariffs are imposed on those imported goods. Now what are these trade tariffs meant to do? Suppose you go to a store to buy a video game. Now you are getting a video game that is made in India for 100 rupees. And you are also getting a video game that is made in some foreign country for 100 rupees. Will you be willing to buy the video game that is made in India for the same price, at which price you will be able to get a foreign product? No, you will not be very willing to buy that Indian video game, and instead you will be eyeing the video game that has been imported from some foreign country. Now to ensure the sustenance of local markets, trade tariffs are imposed on imported goods. This is an example to help you understand what and how trade tariffs are imposed. Britain for $4 a roll. Now when United States is importing that same piece of cloth from Britain, 25% tariff will be imposed on this imported good. Now with this 25% tariff, $1 will be added to the original price. That is, when this piece of cloth that was sold for $4 a roll in Britain, when this same piece of cloth will reach United States, it will become $5 a roll, because 25% trade tariff will be imposed on this imported good. And on the other hand, the United States is also selling the same piece of cloth for $4 a roll. Now whenever any buyer or any customer is going to the United States market or any shop in the US, that person will find that this same piece of cloth that is made in the US is being sold for $4, and that same piece of cloth that has come from Britain or that has been imported from Britain is being sold for $5 a roll. In this way, this person will now choose to buy the cloth that is being produced in the country itself. So in order to ensure the sustenance of the local market, or that you buy things that are made within your country, trade tariffs are imposed on goods that are imported. Now this is not an unfair system, mind you. This is because if this trade tariff isn't imposed on imported goods, no one will be willing to buy products that are made in their own country. And in this way, the production in that country or the production in their very own country will suffer, which is why trade tariffs are always imported on foreign goods. Now this discussion on trade tariffs will help us understand a very important thing when we again go back to the causes of the American Civil War. Let us find out how this discussion on trade tariff will be roped into our discussion. Now the northern states were in favor of trade tariffs. The northern states preferred trade tariffs on imported goods. Now keep this in mind that this is a very important reason behind the split between the northern states and the southern states, which is why you should understand this very clearly. The northern states were producers of finished goods. They got raw materials from the southern states with which they produced finished goods. Now if trade tariffs are imposed on goods that are being imported from Britain, the prices of those goods will increase. Now when the prices of those imported goods will increase, the prices of the goods that are being produced in the northern states will remain relatively lesser. So the people of America will prefer buying the products that are being made in the northern states, and in this way the northern states will be able to sell their products, they will be able to sell their goods. which is why they wanted to ensure that trade tariff is imposed on imported goods so that the goods that they produced remained lesser in price, and so that the Americans bought their own goods, which would facilitate their economy. It is for this reason that the northern states preferred trade tariffs, so that their locally made goods would always be in demand. The southern states of America, on the other hand, demanded that trade tariffs should be revoked. That is, they preferred tax-free trade. Now understand this. The southern states were not able to produce any finished goods because they did not have industries, they did not have factories. They were able to produce only raw materials which were sent to either the northern states or Britain for the production of finished goods. Now whenever the southern states required any finished goods, they had to buy it or purchase it from the northern states or Britain. Now if trade tariffs would be imposed on imported goods, the price of those goods will keep soaring. Now if the price of those goods keeps soaring, the economy of the southern states will be severely impacted. They will not be able to purchase those imported goods which are very high in price. So in a way, they will be left more vulnerable. They will not be equipped to purchase goods. They will not be able to sustain themselves, which is why the southern states wanted tax-free trade so that they could get cheap manufactured goods in exchange for raw cotton and other raw materials that the southern states produced. Now this was a major point of contention between the northern states and the southern states. The northern states on the one hand wanted trade tariffs to be imposed on imported goods for their own good so that their markets are sustained, and on the other hand the southern states wanted tax-free trade so that they can get cheap manufactured goods from other countries, that is from Britain. Now this is one of the major reasons why the American Civil War broke out. But this is not the only reason that led to the outbreak of the American Civil War. In our subsequent lessons, we will devote our discussions to understanding the other reasons that together led to the outbreak of the American Civil War. But this was not the only reason why the American Civil War broke out. In our subsequent lessons, we will devote our discussions to understanding the other reasons that together led to the outbreak of the American Civil War. We will also try to understand how this American Civil War impacted this newly birthed independent nation. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.